I need some traction.
Up next, I'd like to introduce Chris Farinacci from Asana, one of the products we love a lot, and we've used Asana for planning. In fact, most of the speakers, if not all, represent companies whose products we love and we use. Chris was previously CMO of Google for Work, and he has a lot of experience in growing and scaling businesses. Along with him, again, our most sought after tech reporter on the planet, TechCrunch, Frederic Lardinois. Give it up for Chris and Frederic.
He did it again. All right. Somehow I get to talk to all the people who want to make our workday easier, so I appreciate that. Let's start the same way we did with the Trello session, actually. How many of you use Asana? OK. And most of you pay for it? All right. 3 people. That's not too bad.
More than that, yeah.
Not too bad. Chris, before you came to Asana, you were the CMO of Google for Work and Google for Education for, what, 3-4 years?
5 years.
Yeah. For a long time.
Yeah.
What made you leave Google and go to Asana? Google seems like a nice job to have.
Yeah, Google was cool. So a few things, I guess. One is, it's the first time I ever had the same job for 5 years in a row. I don't know about you guys, but I kind of changed jobs every couple years my whole career. It was the first time I was in the same job for a while. But largely because, so Google's enterprise business and education business is, lots of you, I'm sure, are users, is things like Google Apps and Cloud Platform and Chromebooks and things like that. And I would talk to CIOs and users all the time, and we were solving a lot of great problems, as a lot of great companies are, in some of the areas that Jay talked about, like communications and content management and creation and stuff like that. But I kept hearing this visceral problem, statement from CIOs that we weren't actually addressing around, despite all this great technology, there's still this visceral problem that's been around for 20 years where teams actually struggle to focus on the work that actually matters, and they're spending too much time on work about work, too much time trying to coordinate and having and establish clarity on who's actually doing what when and what are the steps between now and completing our work, and will we actually achieve our results, and how do we do that faster. And that that visceral problem statement led me to Asana.
All right. You couldn't do that at Google?
It's just focused on different things. Yeah, was just focused on different parts. And in fact, Google partners with Asana and others in this space for that part of the equation.
All right. Well, let's back up for a moment and talk about Asana itself.
Sure.
What is Asana?
So Asana is a company. We've I guess had a business product out there for about 5 years, and was founded a little bit before that. Focused on what we call work tracking. The analysts and pundits are starting to call work management, which is really kind of solving this problem statement I mentioned around helping teams coordinate and stay on track and understand who's doing what, when, and why. Connecting the mission statement to the actual work that's happening so that people have transparency and clarity at work, whether that's at a team level or at the organization level. So we've been focused on trying to reinvent that. It's sort of there's a lot of traditional tools like project management and task management and workflows that have approached this in sort of old school ways, and we've been trying to approach it in a different way.
And your founding story is pretty interesting as well, because you were founded, you came from Google, but your founders came from Facebook, and Dustin Moskovich, and somebody most of you saw on the social network, I guess, founded the company with Justin Rosenstein, early Facebook engineer. But now you came in way later, but has that influenced the company at all, the fact that these guys came from the early Facebook days?
Yeah, in a big way. So what's interesting, the founding of the company is Dustin, who you mentioned, Facebook co-founder, and he was an early CTO and VP of engineering at Facebook, and Justin, JR, the other guy, who was like an early product manager at Google and then Facebook. When they worked together at Facebook in like the end of last decade, I guess, the engineering team at Facebook had this visceral problem that I see everywhere, where the engineering team was struggling to stay coordinated and on task, and was just spending Facebook's a really execution-focused company, and was then as well. And they were having this trouble, where people were just spending, they were calling it work about work, so much time trying to figure out who's doing what, what's due when, and stay coordinated through meetings and things like that, versus actually just focusing on the flow and getting shit done. And they actually built an internal tool to solve that problem, and it was such a success at Facebook and so critical to the success of the company. It's still part of Facebook's DNA. It's still actually my biggest competitor, this internal tool they built at Facebook. That they realized, wow, this is what we want to do for the rest of our lives. So they founded a company to go do that. And the thinking was, they're very mission-driven guys, and if we can help other companies and other organizations be more efficient, more effective by a couple % or more, what more could we sort of do for the world if we can create tools that empower other companies to do that?
Are they still involved in the company?
Yeah, they're both still really actively involved. So Dustin's my boss, he's the CEO, and JR is the head of product. Yeah.
All right. Now, Asana has been around for quite a while at this point.
Yeah, it was founded at the end of last decade, and we've had a business product out there for 5 years.
5 years. You've got a bit of a history built up there. Talk a little bit about what it was like scaling that company up, and how did you start, and in your understanding, from the early days?
Yeah, sure. So we started in very similar, like the discussion Jay from Atlassian had about sort of their business model and patience and building this land and expand sort of flywheel up from the beginning, and sort of what it takes to do that. That's where we started. That's where we were focused for quite a while. And our intent is very similar to build and grow this flywheel, which is really all about creating a great product and a great user experience around the product and making that seamless, and growing virally via word of mouth, and collaboration from team to team between users and that kind of thing. So for the first few years, we had a business product. All of our revenue, by the way, came through that channel, through self-serve. So largely, marketing and product, and we didn't really touch or talk to customers. And then as we grow, our strategy has always been, and I'm sort of there to help implement this, how to feather on sales and customer success and go to market on top of that. And the goal is not to become like a top-down enterprise company, which is a lot of where I come from, sort of before Google, and a lot of folks that have probably been around come from. But to feather on as we build these snowballs that were talked about inside companies that are growing virally, and maybe we have 30% of the marketing team or 30% of the product team using Asana, to leverage that to go build relationships with the company around things like, whether it's IT wants to understand how to spread that from 30% to all of the function or to a new function, but they want to understand, is this secure, and does it provide the things that enterprises care about, to sort of feather that on top.
Let's unpack that a little bit, though. Start with the self-serve model, which it's what Trello has been doing, Atlassian has been doing. And how well has that worked for you? And at what point did you realize you needed to move on and add a more traditional Salesforce on top of that?
Yeah, I would say, so it's always been the plan. Like the ambition's always been, so if you, like our business model and our strategy for our business model is probably closest to like Slack. There's another company out there that's thinking in a similar way, where so maybe unlike Trello, we're primarily here for work. And like Jira would be a case of that, right? Where we're primarily here to help companies and orgs and teams at work. So a lot of consumers use our product, probably some of you guys, for wedding planning and all those things. Honey-do list is a popular one, but we don't build features for that.
You don't want to be for everybody.
Yeah, we want to be for everybody, but we build product for people at work and that kind of thing. So that's where a lot of our focus is, and self-serve and creating a great product experience has just been the focus from the get-go. And what's interesting, I don't know if we want to get into this or not, is what that means sort of cross-functionally at a company. Like I'm a guy that's been brought on to run business, and I'm finding in lots of companies at this scale, when you get to a certain scale and the next phase of growth, maybe it's beyond Series B or C or whatever that means for your company, but past product market fit and it's time for global scale, they're bringing on folks like me to sort of bring together these business functions. And it's largely interesting that I'm a marketer by background, so I was a CMO for 10 years. They're not actually bringing on enterprise sales guys, they're bringing on sort of other functions, because that is such a customer viral driven thing. So the story you tell customers and how you engage with them, the brand, those things are so critical to the customer experience and managing a critical customer experience. And sales becomes less of it's not a top-down, outbound thing. It's how do you help the teams that are already using your product be more successful and expand into new teams?
But once you start bringing in salespeople, it does change the cultural. I mean, engineers usually tend to look down a little bit on the salespeople, I think, right? So it does change the culture a little bit.
Yeah, so it's interesting, and we should probably talk about culture at some point, because that's something we're really focused on as a company, and we believe, like, to build a sustainable business for the long run, you can't sort of tack on afterwards. You sort of need to think about that as you're building the company. It was actually the first thing we designed before we built a prototype for the product, interestingly. So, sorry, what were we talking about?
We were talking about the culture shift as you bring in salespeople.
So what's interesting is, like, I've been in enterprise for 20-some years, and, like, this is an oversimplified, stereotypical view of how you know, of that. But, like, you know, for 20 years, top-down enterprise selling was driven by, you know, SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, whatever, and Salesforce now, and, you know, a lot of good things happened. But the interactions with customer, as you all know, were driven by selling to executives, you know, tools and dashboards and things that were sold to executives that were sort of inflicted on users, and there wasn't really a big focus on the actual end users themselves. Along came consumerization, and by the way, the sort of pecking order in those companies was sort of like, you know, if this is a balance, was sort of like go-to-market engineering. And then along came consumerization, which was great, you know, maybe 8-10 years ago, and a focus on the actual end users themselves and creating products that users actually want to use at work. And a lot of that stuff, you know, that started as stuff that was familiar to them at home, because their iPhones and the tools on their iPhones became a lot more modern and easy to use than the stuff they had at work. And that drove a lot of great things, a focus on end users and a focus on usability and simplicity. But on the flip side, it drove a mindset in companies that was very engineering-centric. And, you know, as they were focused primarily on consumers, the needs of enterprises and understanding business became sort of secondarily, or something you thought about later. And, you know, my opinion is we're sort of entering this next phase where a number of companies are being born that are being born in an era where they want to focus on the user experience first, but it's not primarily, you know, like, let's focus on building this great consumer business and the needs of consumers and then bring it to enterprise. It's thinking about business users up front from the get-go, but really focused on a great user experience and a great product experience, and then feathering on as you build, as you earn the trust of customers and build value and benefits in companies, feathering on people to help actually build relationships on top of that.
Now, as you look at this consumerization of the enterprise, right, the consumer expectations are growing and growing. How do you actually keep up with that? Because your user base is not, you know, you've got a different user base. It's not a consumer user base that wants to just be at the cutting edge, right? So how do you deal with that friction?
It's a lot of what I'd say would probably be similar to what Michael from Trello said, in that we like to, so we have something called Voice of the Customer. We listen very closely to our customers, but the goal is less about, you know, what solutions do they want, and more really about understanding their pain and their problem statement, and then trying to think of that problem statement in a modern kind of way. So if you take project management, something generic like that, for example, traditional project management was, that we've probably all experienced, was, you know, or can even still be, some person with a Gantt chart calling a meeting going, are we on track, are we off track, where are we? You know, it was really just built for this person to keep everyone on track, versus, you know, built for the whole team to sort of automatically be on track and know where everyone is. So that kind of thinking.
Right, sure. Now, when we talked earlier, you told me that you grew, since you arrived basically in the last 15 months or so, your customer base grew, a paying customer base grew from 10,000 to about 20,000
North of 20,000,
no, that's quite the, how do you do that?
Good question. So, you know, if you look at the history of our company, it follows any sort of cloud or modern sort of company in terms of the customer base. So first few years was, you know, high tech and technology and disruptors and those kinds of things. And then over the last couple of years, we've really started to see strong adoption in the next verticals. So, you know, in the early years, our biggest customers are, you know, Uber, Airbnb, Snap, some of those kind of customers and technology leaders. And now we're starting to grow the last couple of years into both sort of the next verticals. So CPG and retail and travel and transportation and media and entertainment and sort of those next wave of verticals. Also, we're starting to see lots of growth internationally. Okay. One of the things we're really focused on now is, because we have this similar model to some of the other speakers, we've really been focused on starting the relationship online in a self-serve, organic, viral kind of way. Already, well over a third of our revenue, our user base is outside the US, okay. And we really hadn't done anything yet. That was all purely organic, and it was largely English speakers and multinationals and disruptors. And so right now we're really focused on how to really give the users what they want in those markets that aren't English speaking beyond the US, and that's a big growth driver.
Sure, yeah. But how do you adapt your program to that? How do you adapt Asana to the French market or the Chinese market or the Australian market? Because they're all very different.
It's a great question, yeah. So we're starting with Europe, and we're starting with the most popular sort of where we're seeing the most traction in the market and the most interest. And from there, it's a combination of looking at localizing the product and the product experience, which is not just the UI, it's also, does this thing work on the time frame and the units of measure and all those things that are relevant? Does it support the local forms of payments and currencies? But also the go-to-market side of the equation, which is, people want to be communicated with in their native language and work with support and sales and be marketed to, in their local language. And some of it really comes down to the needs of how whatever your value proposition or your benefit or explaining what you do to the end user and the customer, how that translates into a local market. So for us, that can be different in Germany versus France versus the UK and Europe, for example. And so presenting local customers and what local references and customers are doing it and communicate it in a way that is unique to the needs of those countries and markets is really the way to go.
How do you adapt to those different cultures, though? I mean, the French, they want to, after 30 hours, they're done for the week, right?
Yeah.
So they've got a very different approach to work. So if you're the tool that makes them, get their work done so efficiently that they're done in 30 hours.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example there. So I'll just use those examples, I guess. So, like Germany and France are two very interesting markets for us. If you think about the German market, it's a really good fit for what we do because Germans tend to like clarity and process and understand. Our mission is very aligned with what they do. On the flip side, just from past experience, and as most of you know, German companies tend to be very privacy and security conscious, right? So you need to message more to those things, but they get the core value prop, right? In France, that's something more where you're right. Like the focus is less on. I don't know if the French companies want and teams want everyone full transparency, which is a large of what we provide. But they want mindfulness. They want to know that they're focused on the right things, and not focused on the things that are less important, so that they can get their work done and enjoy their 35-hour work week
and then leave for their 6-week vacation.
Yeah.
I assume you use Asana inside of your company as well, right? It's your dog fooding as well. What does Asana's own work culture look like?
So that is a great question. We're sort of we've been focused on culture from the get-go, and the founders, it was a big deal to them to sort of craft, and they talk about crafting the culture as a product, or approaching building the culture and defining the culture and the mission like they approach product, because that's where they came from in the early days, and they had the luxury of sort of defining. Or the starting point of defining like what a mission and values and culture could look like from the very inception of the company. If you or I had the luxury of designing where we'd want to work for the next 20 years, that might be where we'd start. And it's not just about culture. It's about like to build a fast growth, sustainable business in the long run. A firm belief that that's the requirement. And it's interesting the way they did it. So they sort of looked at what they knew, and they sort of took. To start, this from Google, and this from McKinsey, and this from Facebook, and they designed, the missions, the mission statement, and the values. And we could talk about that. Our mission is to help teams work better together, more effortlessly, to make work more effortless. But what's also interesting is they sort of designed the operating structure of the company from the get-go to be different. So, as an example, we run on what's called episodes, and we've adopted all this over time, as the company grows, but that's the key. The mission statement stays the same, and everything else is up for grabs to grow and evolve. And an episode is basically originally a 4, now a 6-month period that the company runs on, where, this is just an example of culture, where the first week at the beginning of a 6-month period, the entire company gets together in what we call Roadmap Week, which is a structured way of bringing functions together to figure out what the priorities are for the next 6 months and what we will build and what we will do together. And then we basically execute for the year. And the tool is a deep part of that. It connects the mission and these objectives to the actual projects and work happening. And then we have these two, this is maybe interesting. I know Jay talked about hackathons, which is probably pretty common in the crowd. We have these 2 weeks outside of those sort of execution weeks within the 6-month period, one we call Grease Week and one we call Polish Week. Polish Week is this week where we just focus on all the little things for customers that you never prioritize or get to, so for the customer experience. And then Grease Week is this week where we just focus on the little things that make internal efficiency, more better and more fun, honestly. And so that's sort of like an example of how that's being implemented.
Do you have an example of what came out of one of those Grease weeks?
Oh, lots. I mean, actually, I should know the features offhand. I don't, but 7 or 8 features in the product came out of those things. Yeah, some of the little things that that users really love that were more of a just weren't prioritized in the roadmap in lieu of bigger things that were prioritized, things like that.
What other things make up the Asana work culture?
So I'd say a few things. If you think about what we're really trying to do, the room's obviously are I assume filled with startups and smaller companies and stuff like that. So being a purpose or mission-driven company makes a lot of sense to you, and a lot of you are probably that. And for older, more established, larger companies, that's not something they can just turn on to sort of, for a CEO to enable that, which we're finding companies want to do. That's a long, hard, transformational kind of thing. But really what we do is focus on providing clarity and transparency and accountability from your mission statement and your purpose and your objectives down to how work actually happens and where work actually happens, particularly around structured work. So if there's a plan or a process or a project or a goal, how do you keep teams aligned around that? And that's essentially what our tool does. And we're trying to live the way we're trying to build the product. So we're trying to build this product to enable teams to do that, and we're trying to sort of live in this way, that aligns to that, and we evolve that as we grow.
What's interesting, you're not talking about beer pong tables and daily lunches, but something a little bit more abstract, right?
Yeah.
But I assume you're also doing the rest of the things that engineers expect at this point.
Totally. Like we have some really amazing, we have amazing benefits and all those kinds of things, and I could list them out. But to your point, that's sort of commonplace.
Sure.
I mean, they're great selling points and all that kind of stuff. But I think the folks that work at Asana more want to work there because of this shared mission on top of that. And we're trying to build something, we're trying to build something different. And ultimately, it's because of what we're trying to help customers do, which is, help them enable their missions and do so in a more seamless way.
When we're talking about that culture, these days we're talking a lot about diversity as well. What does Asana do in that respect to bring in a more diverse workforce? Yeah,
so I would say like things that are core to our values are things like openness and curiosity and diversity, both internally, and through enabling that in the product. So, we are very focused on diversity. I don't know if this is true, so don't hold me to it, but I think we were the smallest company ever to hire a person completely dedicated to diversity. At a much smaller scale company, we're a couple hundred people, and we have a lot of work to do, like the rest of Silicon Valley and the rest of the world. But the important thing is to be really focused on it and to implement concrete ways to move forward. Yeah.
Now, looking ahead, you've got your new enterprise sales plan somewhat implemented at this point, but what have you learned from that, and what are you changing going forward, and then what should we expect from Asana in the next few years?
So for those in the room thinking about sales and that kind of stuff, the way I would describe it is, we like I mentioned, had a paying product out there business product out there for 5 years. The first 3+ years, we were completely self-serve. So we would get to the point where we had 1,000 users or more inside some of these companies I mentioned without actually having talked to them at all. So through sort of the freemium part and adoption, through converting them to the premium product, and then actually expanding those companies. And our strategy all along has been this 3-tiered approach, and we're sort of 2 tiers in and just beginning the 3rd chapter. That 2nd tier was that we've been focused on the last couple of years. It's been layering a sort of, I call it, I don't like this, I don't necessarily use the terms like inside sales and enterprise sales, but layering a light touch sales team on top of that and a customer success team on top of that. And the jobs of both those teams were really to, and are really to help companies adopt, to help them grow and get value out of what they're paying for or using the product, and then help them, grow from there. So that's sort of what we've built out over the last couple of years. We're in the process of now that we're in larger companies and are starting to have a meaningful footprint in large companies, is building out, we're calling it a solution sales team, but and it's a small team of a few people right now that's growing, that's focused on where we've earned the love or the benefit of larger teams inside larger companies. How do we establish relationships? And those relationships are coming at us inbound because they have this referenceable base inside these companies. How do we build relationships with the executives that want to understand more, want to check certain boxes, and want to make sure we help them build a relationship to grow further and sort of, consolidate our footprint in certain parts of the company.
Does that involve eating a lot of steak?
That does not. So it's not we do not have it's not an outbound sales force kind of thing at all where you're flying around targeting, it's largely just focused on, like I don't know that we'll ever have an outbound sales team that's just focused on, hey, we're focused on this vertical or this market and who are the executives and let's call them and get to meet them. We're really focused on building this viral bottom-up referenceable customer base and then leveraging that and working with the executives that connect to that business to grow, either across the company or up within the company based on an internal happy reference.
Sure. Yeah. Now, Trello wants to get to 100 million users. What's your benchmark?
Well, we don't have a public one, but our mission is to make all teams more efficient and effective at work. And that's an aspirational mission, but it would be measured in, I'd add another 0 to that in terms of like what we aspire to do.
All right.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks.
I need some traction. You need some traction. Let's get some traction.